My name is David Bellamy. I'm the founder and CEO of Auckland. We're a UK-based real-time employee voice technology company, and we help organisations to transform the way that they understand and engage with their workforce. So over the next 25 minutes or so, I'm going to tell you why that's important. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our journey, the challenges we've had to overcome, and the lessons that we've learned in doing so. Some of which are pretty big, actually, and they're sort of well worth learning for lots of organisations. But before we do that, let's start with some contextual stuff. Why should we even be listening at all? And that might seem like a very basic question, but let me just share some thoughts on this. The first thing is, of course, that our employees know the biggest issues facing our company today because they face them every day, right? The things that are getting in the way of them working well, the issues with their technology, the processes, the things that irritate customers, the things that suppliers find frustrating. There's a whole host of things that employees can tell us if we only listen to them. Employee sentiment, whether you call that engagement, well-being, happiness, whatever, they all sort of broadly correlate with, I said broadly, they will directly correlate, they will directly correlate with business outcomes, right? So the research is pretty clear, isn't it? That sales, customer service, loyalty, retention, productivity, innovation, all linked to how employees feel, and that makes it a pretty good indicator of organisational health. And so if you ask them how they're feeling, they'll probably tell you. The quality of our decision making, this is quite important, relies heavily on our ability to make sense of our context. So anybody who's ever had to make big, complex decisions, and if you lead a large number of people, you're faced with these all of the time. It's based upon our ability to make sense of our environment, right? And therefore, establishing meaningful feedback loops directly from the front line to the boardroom or to the top of the organisation with minimal interference in terms of filtering. I think we all know what I mean there. It's likely to lead to better quality decisions, to better sense making, better decisions. And we could come up a level, if you like, and start thinking a little bit about, so strategically, why is this stuff important? Well, look, any organization's ability to execute its strategy, deliver on its complex goals is intrinsically linked to its people. So nothing good happens without the right people in the right environment doing their best. Right. In some ways, that's sort of largely a talent management question, isn't it? How do we attract, nurture, retain the right people to make our organisation successful? But I think it goes a bit further than that. It feels more like it speaks to culture and leadership too. And we have to be clear, aside from perhaps being good at attracting talent and describing things in the right way for people, so we're caring about the right sorts of issues, the reality inside our firms suggests that we might be falling short, to say the very least. Right, it's not working terribly well. Far too many people at work are disengaged, feel undervalued, not listened to, insignificant, all sorts of things like that, and it manifests in a whole host of different ways, and that hurts the individuals and the companies that they work for. Now, let's talk about some stats, and look, this is my story. I've cherry-picked some numbers, but the story I think still stands up. We know engagement is a problem, right? According to Gallup, celebrating this year, 23%, a record, 23% of people engaged at work globally. I think that's desperately, it's dismal. And we can celebrate 23% of people being engaged at work as some kind of achievement. And I know that's not about Gallup. It's about, the language needs to change. We can do better than this. 84% of millennials have experienced burnout in their current role. That's not in their working life, that's in their current role. That's a significant number. Thinking back to our 23% of engaged people, well, 1 in 5 of those is still at risk of burnout. We probably know why that is as well, right? Because they're the people who put their hands up for everything. They're the ones who are doing as much as they can to help the organisation, but overload, too much work, burns out. And there's nothing you can do by way of breathing, resilience training, those sorts of things that are going to solve that, right? We have too much work to do and too few people, we're going to burn out. 48% of remote employees lack emotional support. I think that's really interesting, right? So lots of good stuff comes from the flexibility that we've been afforded in the way that work has changed, but 48% of people working at home lack emotional support. The bar here, I think, is pretty low and we can do better. But it goes further, right? So According to a Gartner survey, in 2022, the average employee experienced 10 planned enterprise changes. So we're talking about restructuring, cultural transformation, new ways of working, replacement of major tech systems. And that's up from 2 transformations of similar nature in 2016. Right. So that same survey pointed out that employees' willingness to support the said changes had fallen from 74% in 2016 to 43% in 2022. And I think that last point speaks directly to the heart of what's wrong with the way employee engagement is approached right now, and the way it's been approached for many years. Too often engagement is treated as though it's a transactional process. In fact, a series of transactions. We pick it up and we put it down when it suits us, when we want something, right? We're interested in engagement when we want to ask you about it. We're interested in engagement when we need something. But I think we need to start thinking about it as a relationship building process, particularly if we're going to make lots of big asks from people. Now, Wendy Furlot, our head of engagement here at Harkin, uses this terrific analogy of moving house. Right. So if you can imagine asking one of your team to help you move, right, you're going to pick somebody with whom you've got a pretty tight relationship. Now, if you needed 10 people to help you, 20 people, 50 people, 100 people, 1,000 people to help you move, it starts to get trickier, doesn't it? What sort of relationships do you need to have with those people to get them to help you move, right? And yet, as I mentioned just a moment ago, we're making big asks like this far more frequently at work. And when we don't have a relationship in place, when there is nothing that ties us, when I don't feel valued, cared for, meaningful, listened to, all those sorts of things, in fact, when I don't feel like we have a meaningful relationship, then I'm going to be reluctant, if not outright resistant to that change. And that slows our organizations down and it makes things more complex for everybody. So if we want to change the way that our organizations function, to make them agile, change ready, resilient places, then we need to invest in relationships, and that's where listening becomes critical. Now, our idea, let me take you back on the take now time, I guess, to take you on the journey. Our idea, the big idea back in 2016 was to change the way that organizations tuned in to information. Right. And so for context, back then we were a management consulting firm. My organization, this firm was a management consulting firm, and I've been a consultant for 17, 18 years. The work we were doing at this time was a bit like the Jim Collins Good to Great. How can we help an organization go from where it is to the best possible version of itself? And part of that work relied on us doing sort of retreats with leadership. And we've all seen sort of mission, vision, value type activity. Now, one of the exercises that we would run was around culture. So we would ask leadership teams to, in pictures and words, describe their organization if it could be everything you could imagine. Now, let me tell you that every organization, when they do that piece of work, would automatically become one of the inspiring workplaces that we hear Matt and his team talk about. But after they'd done that, we'd say, okay, what's it like today? And we'd then get a much, much less shiny picture. Still pretty chirpy. I suspect they've been in the running for inspiring workplaces, but much less positive. And then our big reveal was to say, look, by the way, we've done this with your people already, and here's what they say it's like to work here. Here's what they say it's like to work here. And sorry, that little thumb popped up on my screen and put me off. I think it was me waving my hand around. So we'd say, we've done this with your people, and here's what they say it's like to work here. And that was where the fireworks would kick off, right? Because that was the point at which everybody would realize that, hey, how could we be so wrong? How could we have such a different view? And why don't we know about this? And of course, that would be a typical CEO's reaction, which is, why don't I know that this is how people are feeling, or this is what people experience? Now, a big chunk of that, as we concluded, was actually we're just relying on information too periodically, right? So surveys is the sort of go-to model. Certainly back in 2016, it was annual surveys. it just leaves gaps, right? So it gives us a lot of good things, tells us a lot about certain aspects of work, but it's controlled. It's the company's deciding what it wants to ask, and it's done periodically. And so we're missing out on a lot of richness of day-to-day life. And that was where we set out, right? With could we change the way that organizations listened through changing the way we asked? So we set off with a beta product in 2017 that would collect 2 bits of information, right? How do you feel right now? And that was a numerical data point. And why do you feel that way? Freeform narrative. By the end of 2017, I was going to be a billionaire. What did I know, right? That was where we started. I think the first thing, when I look back on the journey from where we are today, the first thing we realized that we needed to address was activating voices. It's not enough just to ask. I think we learned that actually people don't expect their organization to listen to them. I think that's a really sad indictment. So the sense of what's the point was something we had to overcome. People didn't feel, in many organizations still don't feel, as though they can trust their organization if they express dissenting views. So we hear lots about psychological safety. People, certainly back when we started, found that it was very difficult for them to say anything for fear of being discovered. Found out what would happen if. And the other thing we learned quite early on was that for lots of people, they don't feel like they have a voice, and that was a real chink of opportunity. So these are the things we had to solve. If we wanted to make work better for everybody, if we wanted to get better insights out, then we needed to really unlock this question: how do we get people to speak up? And I think the first 2 things that I would say to anybody watching this or listening to this talk is anonymity is absolutely crucial. And I'm not partial anonymity, not, here's 45 questions about what team you're in and your demographic. I think that the more we can do to protect somebody's identity, and there's much more I could share about this, but that's probably for another day. The more we can do to protect people's identity, the more we're going to do to help them to speak more freely. It's not speaking with impunity. These are professional tools, but when you're at work, the idea of getting more truth out of people, getting more honesty, getting at it quicker, that really comes down to people feeling safe enough to share. And I'll say this to anybody. I've done it on podcasts, and they're like, I don't care how good, caring, kind a leader you are. Power distance stops people from speaking truth to you, right? So the anonymity piece is really important to activating voices. The other thing that we learned, and it comes back to something I've said already about surveys in particular, about the way that we tend to solicit information from employees, which is tell us about this. The freedom to express yourself in your own words. Now, that took a bit of time actually to get used to for employees and for us to sort of work out what that means. But actually getting to express my day in my words, in my way, is really powerful, because suddenly you see people, we're asking this two-step question: how do you feel? Why do you feel that way? And why do I feel that way starts to become some detailed feedback about particular processes or about some stuff I was doing, looking at the way that we represent our brand online, and suddenly you're getting some richness that just doesn't come out of other things. And I'm going to talk about some of the other things that come out. So actually sort of well-being checks and stuff, as in the words that people use when they're expressing how they're feeling, brings other stuff. But that's only really enabled by allowing the employee, the user, the human at the other end of this process to choose what they want to share. So those 2 things, right? So anonymity and giving freedom of expression, if you like, safely. The next big thing we learned, so I come back to the sort of the way our process works. So data point, so a rating scale. Now we happen to use a 0 to 100, and we think that's nuanced. It gives us lots of, it gives people lots of room to express themselves in different ways. 0 to 10 tended to get us lots of one number, and a 0 to 100 doesn't, if people tune into that differently. Anyway, so that's, but we realized we could see some unexpected stuff in our data. This is going back a few years. And that took us on a different path. So there's a story that I've told many times. I won't tell it again today, but basically we realised in a particular instance with a person in the US that we could see personal struggle and sort of signs of burnout in our data. Now, well, the first time we saw it, and similarly later, that we were looking backwards at patterns of data. But it took us down a road where we sort of realised if it was in our data, could we do something to help prevent it? Right? So could we use that data to get ahead of it? And today that enables us to pick out the voice or the person in the crowd that's showing signs of needing some help. Really, really quite early. And it goes further than that, because we then sort of use our anonymous conversation tools or links to enable our clients to connect HR or wellbeing professionals to that employee without ever revealing that employee's identity. So you have a sort of one-to-one secure link. Now, the reason for telling you that bit is that when we first did that, so you sort of work out, okay, so we build some algorithms that are going to help us to pick out people who look in data terms, in patterns of data, like they might be struggling. So what happens if we send them a message? So inside the platform, so it's not an email, but what if we send them a message? Is it going to feel like sort of Big Brother, somebody's watching you? And that was the big fear, and to our relief, surprise, and sort of, I guess, that fueled much of what followed. People didn't feel threatened. They didn't feel like somebody was watching them, Big Brother. If there was a Big Brother feeling, it was the positive connotations of the expression. Somebody actually cares. And so what would happen is somebody from HR would reach out and say, look, I don't know who you are. I won't know who you are when you reply, but listen, Harkin has put up a flag suggesting you might be struggling or you might need some help or whatever the right words would be. Do you need to talk? Can I help you? Do you know about the resources that we have available to us? And what happens is people reply saying, I didn't know the system could do that. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful that you care. And it makes a difference. And I think that goes a long way, doesn't it? To helping people feeling anonymous and safe to share what they're sharing and to engage with a tool like this, and then to get support, kindness, validation, meaning back from people is really, really important. And then as the anonymized conversation part, so that free-form narrative sort of went on a journey as well, right? So, and this becomes really important for the way that we think about employee voice as well. So one of the things that we saw relatively early as well, so once people got comfortable with the way that this system works, was you would see, we like to imagine that people are going to share deeply insightful observations about work and things that need to be fixed. And of course, I've alluded to some of those things already. Sometimes they share other things, right? And so sharing struggles and challenges. And so as sort of the levels of interactiveness, if you like, the levels of interaction available within our platform evolved, you see the impact of some of these things. And so somebody shares a challenging story, and so emoji reactions, right? So they've sort of evolved with our platform, increased in number. I'll just pick one, for example, the hug emoji, right? So or hug reaction, which I resisted for a long time. And do you know what? Somebody shares a difficult story and one of your colleagues replies to the hug. How do you think you feel about that? Do I feel trivialized? No, I don't. I feel like somebody heard me and somebody cares about me. And I think that was, again, things like that, this sense of care, the meaning that we derive from colleagues feeling like I matter at work is immense, right? And there's a story, that sort of peer-to-peer stuff, I think has become a really big feature of the way we see organizations listening, because it's not about the boardroom listening to the shop floor, it's a peer-to-peer thing, right? So conversations doing this, right? Anonymized, equalized voice, all that sort of stuff, really important. But there's a great story that we tell. There's an animation version of this, which really doesn't do it quite justice on our website, if you're ever inclined to go and look. But you go back, I think probably it would have been last year, so 2022. And somebody goes on to Harkin in their organisation and they rate 0, right? So I mentioned before 0 to 100. So a 0 rating is quite a significant thing for us. And writes a comment about a personal struggle, right? So declares themselves as a man. We, sort of often struggle with my mental health. Something happened yesterday and it's tipped me into a downward spiral. And I know that, I know when these things happen, I find them difficult to dig out. And it's very interesting to read, touching, and what happened over the next 24, 48 hours was loads of colleagues replied. So all of whom, so completely anonymous. There's no way of knowing who sent. There's no avatars, no profiles, just dialogue. And people were coming back and saying, look, so courageous for sharing. Have you looked at the EAP support? Have you looked at the resources we've got available? I'm also a man that struggles with mental health. What I'd suggest is do this. It's a struggle, but you'll get through it. And so you watch this sort of outpouring of support, love, kindness, compassion. And then right at the end of this thread, the original post, you come back and just said, look, can I just thank you all? This platform made it possible for me to speak up, and you guys have given me the nudge I needed to get some help. I booked a session with counselling. And that story ends, it doesn't end on our video this way, but the story ends with that same individual approaching their CEO at an internal conference, and the CEO told me this later, and just said, you changed my life. I went into a spiral. The fact that we have a culture like this that supports and cares for us in this way, and Harkin plays a part in that, of course. That the changes everything, right? So that individual's thriving, and I think that for me, so the point of this story is that care thing, that becomes such a significant driver of belonging and lots of other things, right? So we want all the discretionary effort, etc. Comes from feeling like we're part of something. I touched on this a little bit already, but equal voice. So for reasons I've explained already, right? So no avatars, no profiles, completely anonymous, protecting individuals, those sorts of things. But the number of people that have spoken to us over the years talking about having a voice at last. I talk about this often in terms of my own background, where as a white now middle-aged man, I know it's surprising, but as a white middle-aged man, that in my early part of my career, I didn't have a problem speaking up, and I wasn't challenged for it, and nobody dismissed my views because of who said it. I think I'm learning a bit more about that today, right? So this idea of making it safe for people, so taking out layers of hierarchy, taking out anything that identifies us, suddenly starts to mean that our voices equalise. That's what we're thinking about with equal voice, right? So, and one of our clients put this to us. So we're working with an Indian organisation, and if you know anything about Indian culture, in organisations they have a big problem with dissent, and as in people not expressing it, not expressing opinions, not giving feedback, just head down doing their work. And in this organisation, one of the female employees dropped us a note just to say, what I love about Harkin is the fact that it's all about what's being said, not who's saying it. And so the lesson in here, of course, is making sure that we're thinking about these things when we're building voice mechanisms and feedback tools, that we're starting to think about, look, if we're only going to rely on feedback in the room from people, then we're going to take out all of the people who don't process information in the same way, right? So sort of neuroatypical or neurodivergent people, we have to think about that. So asynchronous and anonymous communication tools open up stuff to lots of people. It makes them more inclusive for sure. It makes them more accessible. But starting to think about that really has made a difference to the way we approach our work. And that, of course, why do we do that? Because you're going to get much more insightful stuff from people that you're not currently hearing from, right? If you're constantly hearing from me in the room because I'm, got a big mouth, then you're going to get the same insights all the time. But broadening that out, reaching the parts of your organisation that find it hard to speak up, that's where there's going to be a whole new load of insight and richness. So that becomes, again, another psychological safety thing. The next thing I want to talk about quickly is again, this unique an individualized sense of experience, right? So culture is largely experienced by the individual. And so, so when we think about definitions, best definitions, there is no single agreed definition of culture for sure, but the best one is probably the way we do things around here. And somebody on our podcast recently, Jeff Marlowe, gave me a bit of a lesson here, which I've not forgotten. The we and the around here in that sentence change a lot. And it explains a few things to me that I've not really been able to get my head around previously. So, of course, we're in a group of people. This is where all the things that we think about, psychological safety and trust, all those sorts of things, keep changing in work. We're in a group of people, that's the we. If I change to a different group, it's a different we. And that around here has changed too. So when I think back to the story I was telling you about our origins and how leadership found it very difficult to recognize the culture that people were describing to them, why don't I see this? Why don't I feel the culture this way? It was because the we and the around here has changed when you're in the room. So when leadership walks around, things happen a bit quicker. People tend to be a bit different, let's put it that way, right? For whatever reasons, and you could joke about this. I often say that, so I don't know if you notice this, but people don't throw petals in front of, regular folk in the office and all that sort of stuff. But I think that's obviously tongue in cheek, but the point of that is, our perspectives are constantly changing. So we have to find ways of generating a richer sense of individualized experience. And there's another part to this, right, which is then back to that sense-making point I made at the beginning as well. Because, making that information transparent, what we see is rather than, one of the questions we're often raised or often challenged with is, misery loves company. What do people say? Bad stuff, aren't we all going to, isn't it all just going to snowball? And that's just a bad indictment of how organizations feel their employees are feeling. But in reality, what happens is I share an experience and my colleagues will help me understand whether my experience is a shared one. They'll talk to me about what's going on for them and their interpretations. And so you'll see cultural alignment happening. It helps me to process what I've just experienced. Was that good, bad, indifferent? Or maybe did I just misread it? Everybody else heard something different than I do. And having an environment where we're actively listening, making transparent that insight, then suddenly we get to a greater opportunity to do things that matter, like aligned action. So we all now understand our context better because we're able to share our own experiences and sense check with our colleagues in a safe and non-judgmental way starts to make a big difference. So in summary, I think what we're really talking about here, the sort of lessons that we've learned, the way organizations listen and treat engagement is largely transactional. Moment in time, we change a few things, but in reality, organizations are dynamic and complex. The more we can do to create a richer, more realistic picture of where we are right now, the better decision making we're going to have, the more likely we're going to be able to make effective adjustments to our direction. The more we can share what it's like for different people in our organization and how they experience work, the greater our collective ability to make sense of our context and take aligned action, as I've said. The more we can do to learn, to lean into people's experiences and use dialogue to positively influence the culture, then the better our relationships will be. And organizations rely on relationships, as I've said. Relationships need dialogue and they need mutual care, and that's where we get to trust. And once we're there, we're going to find ourselves in that organizational state I described right at the beginning, agile, resilience, and change ready. And that's the stuff we're going to need if we want to thrive moving forward. Today's talk, or my talk, has been part of this series of talks for inspiring workplaces under a banner of the Inspirathon. If this conversation or talk has inspired you in any way to want to learn more about the different ways you can listen, or ways that, or other aspects of our journey, if you want to probe into any of the things I've talked about, there's much more we could share. Then feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, David Bellamy. Follow Harken's company page on LinkedIn too. You can visit harken.com, or indeed just drop me an email at david@harken.com. And thank you for listening.